is Jack Gurley, and with me in the office today are three experts on the Middle East who have visited 6 major U.S. cities to teach, talk, and preach in a project sponsored by the Presbyterian Binational Service Program. The three, who have roots in Israel, Lebanon, and the West Bank, have met with Presbyterians, Jews, and ecumenical groups who are working for peace and justice in the Middle East. First is Anan Jabara, a U.S. citizen born in Syria who has lived in Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon before coming to this country in 1974. She is presently teaching at Wayne State University. Next is Haim Baram, a resident of Jerusalem and member of the Israeli Council for Israeli-Palestinian Peace and of the Executive Committee of the Shelley Peace Party there. And finally, we have Wael Kier, a Lebanese lawyer who is Program Assistant for Human Rights in the Middle East Council of Churches and a resident of Beirut. Now, would you like to comment on your experience as an Israeli, a Palestinian, and a Lebanese unknown to each other, getting together and spending this month on this tour? Were there any problems?
I would respond to that. I think it was a great experience for the three of us to have the opportunity to talk to as many American people as we did. What impressed me in this experience is that I found a large number of American people very receptive and supportive of the Palestinian people, and that while it's encouraging on one hand, it's also discouraging, because I find the United States government policy is not consistent with what the American really believe. I do not find hostility from the American towards the Palestinian or towards the PLO. And a lot of Americans do believe that the Palestinian people should have a right of independence and self-determination.
For me, it wasn't a new thing to have a dialogue with the Palestinian. We have been conducting these dialogues for a long time now within the peace movement, and also, of course, working together with Palestinians in the West Bank to try to alleviate some of the oppressive measures that are being used against them. On the other hand, I was also very pleasantly surprised to have so many American people really support the cause of peace in the Middle East. Now, in addition to the general sympathy to the Palestinian problem, I think the majority of the American people also really love the Israeli state and the Israeli people. On the other hand, they are very much concerned and worried about the policies of Menachem Begin, and many of them see his oppression against the Palestinians and his intransigence and expansionist policies as something that is alien to them. It is not familiar to them from the point of view of being familiar with the Jewish community, and they know that the Jewish community here for generations traditionally championed the cause of liberties and human rights all over the world, and they don't understand how come that the same people give some kind of backing to Menachem Begin's policies. And we have been trying to address ourselves to these problems and questions. Spoke to hundreds of wonderful people, and I think overall my lesson from this is a great experience, and I think we taught a lot, but we also learned a lot.
Yeah, it was a very exciting experience in terms of the team, in terms of the audience, and in terms of the issues. Now the teams, as you mentioned, has a message to give by the sheer structure of the team. When you have a Palestinian and Israeli, as well as a Lebanese, traveling for a month together, we should remember that a lot of bloodshed was spent between these three particular peoples and nations in the Middle East. And yet you find three people who did not know each other before, agreeing to commit themselves to a whole month of traveling together. And it was a marvelous experience and a wonderful surprise to see how well we could get along with one another. Now this is as far as the team is concerned. When you come to the issues, Well, certainly we need not agree on every particular detail, but the basics, there was full agreement on the basics, namely the necessity of peace in the region.
Well, during your tour of the states, you met with church groups, with civic organizations, and I understand that you were in Washington yesterday and met with the Congress. Would you care to give your reactions to that meeting?
We met with a number of congressmen and senators, and I have to tell you, in general, I was discouraged. While my trip and talking to the American people, I was kind of getting a little bit optimistic that finally there's some breakthrough in this country concerning the Palestinian issue. I was in general discouraged. That doesn't mean that we met 2 or 3 people who were very sympathetic to the Palestinian issue. And the meetings gave me a feeling that there is an attitude of racism when it comes to the Palestinian people. And I will tell you exactly what I mean. Like when you ask some people who are in a committee of International Human Rights Committee that I'm concerned about the Palestinian in the West Bank, and they respond, how about Jews in Syria? That to me is racism. Number one, I'm not the president of Syria. Number two is that every Palestinian has to pay for any oppression happen to any Jew, any place in the world. People, human beings should be treated equally. If there is oppression to Jews or any other community, any place of the world, does not justify by any means the oppression of the Palestinian people.
Would you say that Congress is not listening to the American people on this particular subject?
I think they are not listening to the Palestinian people. That is true. The Palestinian people had made it very clear that they want independence. They believe the PLO represent them. Menachem Begin, who had a long history of terrorism, documented, nobody questioned the Israeli people whether they really want Menachem Begin to represent them. That we take it as a fact. When it comes to the Palestinian people, somebody other than the Palestinian have to determine to them who represent them. And that brings me to an interesting comment that President Reagan made about a week or 10 days ago. He said the PLO does not represent the Palestinian people simply because the Palestinians did not elect the PLO. And I wonder if the people of refugees and people under occupation do have the right for election. And yet they say King Hussein will speak for the Palestinian, and I would like to respond, when did ever the Palestinian people elect King Hussein to represent them?
The Jordanians didn't elect him either. I mean, I don't think he's ever been elected by any non-democratic
And
procedure.
even by the Israeli government, when Sharon goes to Lebanon and say, I want to crush the PLO because I want to crush the aspiration of the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza. That to me is a loud statement from him that the Palestinian people in West Bank and Gaza look to the PLO as their representative. There's 115 nations represent the PLO. We don't need 2-3 more wars before the United States government come and say, I recognize the PLO. They insisted they will never talk to the Viet Cong. Finally they did. You don't have to like the PLO. It represents the Palestinian people and not the American people.
Well, certainly, I share Anand's views completely. I mean, I was very discouraged to see some of the manner of the behavior, not only the essence and the content of it. Some of them were very blasé, condescending and patronizing, especially towards Anand. And I took very, very strong offense when I saw this. And I saw it as a symptom of the attitude. I mean, one of them asked Wael where he came from. He said Lebanon, and me, Israel. But Anand was like a person from nowhere, no identity, no homeland, and I think it in some way symbolizes the whole thing. And as an Israeli, I saw that everyone recognized my existence and my right for self-determination, including Anand, the Palestinian. And on the other hand, I felt that the Palestinians don't get even-handed attitude on the part of the elected politician in the Congress. And I think some of them misjudge the situation. They think that they by supporting Menachem Begin, they support Israel. And I think by supporting Menachem Begin, they undermine and jeopardize my future and the future of my family in the Middle East and in Israel. I think it's a self-contradictory attitude to be pro-Israel and pro-Begin. These are contradictions in terms.
there was total discard of the human dimension of it. Nevertheless, it was very beneficial for me. I think, in a sense, by being exposed to this this reality in the Capitol Hill was most instructing. It would be, in this sense, much better than just to select a number of congressmen who may fail to represent a reality, and then we will be given the impression that this is how people are, and this is how they feel, and this is how they behave. I suppose what we were faced with was a reasonable cross-section of the people, their mentality and their attitude. And of course, one has to take that into consideration for any future planning and behavior.
We were told that we met the better ones, so God knows who was the others, you know.
In your meetings with the American people, did you meet with people from the Lebanese, the Jewish, and the Palestinian communities?
We met the Jewish community in Chicago. We spoke actually in a temple, Solel Temple in Chicago, and we enjoyed a surprisingly very, very good audience. Receptive, open, not prejudiced except for one or two. We also spoke to Jewish newspapers and to the leaders of the Jewish communities, especially in Syracuse. We met the entire leadership of the Jewish community in Syracuse. We met the Arab community in Syracuse also, in the St. Elias Church there. And again, we have had a very, very friendly and warm relationship. For me especially, it was a fantastic experience because many of these people in the Arab church in Syracuse had been exposed for the first time in their lives to an Israeli in the synagogue, and speaking in the way that I did, I think did a hell of a lot of good for everyone concerned. And I was really touched by this, and I think this is very important. I think to emphasize at this point that except for the rational plan for peace, etc., we also conveyed some kind of emotional message of identifying ourselves with the people under oppression. And I think people sense it when you are sincere. They feel it immediately, that you really mean it when you say it. And if you don't, they also feel it. And therefore, I think we've had marvelous reception. In addition to this, we had a peace conference in Atlanta, which was organized by the Palestinian Committee for Human Rights, but it turned from just merely a demonstration of solidarity with the Palestinian people, which it was, of course, also into a peace conference. Because many Israelis were present, including myself, and the three of us spoke in the conference, and I think we contributed quite a lot to the atmosphere of dialogue and reconciliation between the people. This was very, very important.
Lebanese per se we did not come across. Certainly in many of the meetings there were Lebanese, but they were under somehow different label. They will be there under the Arab label. But Lebanese as such, I felt there should be more visibility of them. Now I fully understand why it wasn't so, mainly because of the fragmentation of the Lebanese community here. They are divided between two branches. One branch would be those who claim to be only Lebanese, and they negate any other description. On the other hand, you have the others who will focus on the other quality, and at times they will underestimate their identity as Lebanese. So in fact, you find these two extreme positions, which will be very difficult to get both of them in any one audience. I think the nature of this tour made it much more logical to address itself to the Arab Lebanese rather than the Lebanese per se. That's the reason why there were very, very few Lebanese in our audience.
We basically talked to people from the Presbyterian Church. That was the overwhelming of our audience. However, one interesting experience for me as a Palestinian is when I spoke in a synagogue in Washington.
In Chicago?
I'm sorry, yeah, it was in Chicago. It was interesting for me because I believe in general that the Jewish community in this country have been historically in the forefront of every liberal cause. Yet when it comes to the Palestinian, they don't want to deal with that issue at all. Every time I speak to Jewish crowd, this is not my first experience, as if they personalize the conflict and they start to see that it's not a really anti-Semitic conflict. I always said, I do not want the support of one anti-Semitic person. I don't want anybody to come and support me because he hates the Jews. That hurt my cause and I don't want to deal with these people.
Haim, I suppose it would be more appropriate for an Israeli to talk to the Jewish community than anyone else.
Well, I think this is obvious. We have all the credentials to address the Jewish population here. We Israelis in the peace movement, a person like myself, for instance, who has been a soldier in the Israeli army for 24 years now, and bring up his children in Israel and his whole family in Israel, and has also absolutely no intention of abandoning Israel for the greener grass of Western Europe or United States of America. Absolutely no intention. And I think people like myself are ideally equipped to address the Jewish people, to expose to them the impossibility of continuing to support Begin's government on one hand and to remain liberal and true to the universal ideals on the other hand. And also I think it's very important for them to hear from an Israeli point of view, and this school of thought is growing in Israel all the time, as you know, especially since the invasion of Lebanon, that we think that the Palestinian self-determination is essential to Israel's security. Because these two notions are being presented as contradictory. On one hand, we have, of course, the Palestinian problem. On the other hand, Israel's security, and this, you can't have the two together. I think you must have Palestinian self-determination in order to have security for Israel. And the example that I introduced many times, and many people understood this, is that if you want to travel safely in the El Al Israeli Airlines, you must have Palestinian civilian airlines also. I think this is the essence of the whole thing. They must have a flag, they must have a structure, they must have an establishment, they must have the president or prime minister, they must have ambassadors, must have the whole thing. And then they will have for the first time vested interest in the peace in the Middle East. So we don't speak about peace alone, we speak about a just peace, which means not meeting the demands of absolute abstract justice, but at least satisfying the minimal demands of all the parties to the conflict. And I think almost every American that we talk to about this is really fair-minded people of America now. And they listen to this argument, and most of them see that this is really true. And I think this is the reason why Begin and his government are trying to prevent the dialogue by imposing this kind of emotional blackmail and pressure on the people who are trying to initiate and to maintain this dialogue. So to sum it up, an American Gentile who will speak about oppression in the West Bank may be castigated as anti-Semite, an Arab as the enemy, a Jew as a self-hating Jew. But they can't say the same thing about an Israeli who has been fighting for his country, and his future is at stake.
Do you feel that if the United States government were to undertake an open dialogue with the PLO or the Palestinians, that would be a practical move toward the peace in the Middle East?
At the moment, they don't do anything like this at all. I think if the American government will recognize the PLO, they will give a final seal to a reality that had already been existing for many, many years, where the entire family of nations recognize the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. And as an Israeli, of course, I would like to sign a peace agreement with people whose signature means something to the people. If I sign a peace agreement with Arafat, I finish the historic conflict that I had with the Palestinian people. And I think the American could have helped a lot by recognizing this reality and lending it legitimacy from Washington's point of view. And you know the leverage that Washington has in Jerusalem.
Of course, the recognition of the United States government to the PLO will be very productive in creating peaceful conditions in the region. The point that I always try to make, you cannot have oppression and peace in the same time. Israel is 3.5 million people. The Palestinians are a little bit over a million. The overwhelming majority of them either live under occupation or refugees surrounding Israel, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. There is no way you can oppress these people forever. You can kill them. I don't think that's a very good option, but to persecute them, it's impossible. So we have to come from the assumption, the United States government have to come and say, the Palestinian people are a nation and they have the right of self-determination. For me, that's enough. Then we can proceed from there. I think it's well-known fact that the PLO represent the Palestinian people. There were elections in 1976 in the West Bank, carried under the Israeli authority. Every person who won as a mayor was a supporter of the PLO. This is the way the Palestinians can express their support to the PLO. The other point is that there is no other Palestinian organization claim representation to the PLO anyway. They haven't been challenged from the Palestinian community that the PLO does not represent them. So sometimes you have in some liberation movements two movements that each one claim to represent the people in that region or represent their interests. Within the Palestinian movement, we do not have that problem.
Any country that addresses itself to a reality will be something helpful. There's nothing that will be more damaging to politics than to turn your face away from realities. Politics is based on assessment of realities and taking steps towards solving these very situations. So I don't think it would be a reasonable thing for any politician to discard some realities, such as the reality of the Palestinian people, and another reality, it is that the Palestinians, they have opted for the PLO to be their representative.
What can the ordinary citizen in this country do to help the process of peace?
What the Americans can do, of course they can do a lot. First of all, America is a superpower. It has a lot to say in the affairs of the Middle East. And America is also a democracy. Things are not decided by a limited number of people who are just happen to be in a position of power. No, we all know there is the dynamics of the American life would allot a reasonable margin for the public opinion to influence the people who decide for the whole nation. Now, we should not overplay this. This does not mean that every single issue is inspired by the aspirations of the people. It's not true. But on the other hand, it's not true also to say that you have a dictator somewhere in the White House who does everything regardless of what the others feel. This is another extreme which does not reflect any reality. Now, what you could do the following, to have a better assessment of the Middle Eastern reality and to apply the ethics and the values that the American society are based on in dealing with these problems.
I mentioned before that if the United States government support a just peace in the Middle East, build on the assumption that Palestinian people are a nation, they have a right of self-determination, that will help a lot. I don't think the United States government at this stage is taking that position, and this is where the American people have a role to play through their institutions, basically, and that's why I appreciate very much that the Presbyterian Church invite us and take us to educate their people. Because if you want to ask people to do something in support of you, whether to write to their congressman or to express what their interest is, they have to know the facts. I don't think the policy of the United States government in the Middle East is in the interest of the American people, because it's an area of conflict. It's an area where a lot of arms have been sold, a lot of arms have been given. In this country, we have unemployment, we have our own poor. Every conflict outside the region is not in the interest of the American people. The American will need jobs in their own country, and I think they have to take a stand. No more arms to the Middle East, period.
Now, I agree, of course, that the Americans have to exercise their democratic rights through the elected institution, etc. I would like to emphasize the role of the voluntary organization. I was really amazed by the centrality of church in social life in America. This is something that I hadn't been aware to the same extent. I mean, myself, religion plays a very modest role in my own life. And therefore, when I came to America and I saw the tremendous role that the church plays in the community life, I just couldn't believe it. And I think it is about time that the various churches and denominations, including the Jews, will start mobilizing American public opinion, first of all, in order to put pressure on all the parties concerned to get together and to speak. And there are extremists also on the Palestinian side. Although there are the people under oppression, there is no doubt about it. And secondly, to warn the world against a very grim possibility of mass expulsion of Palestinians from the West Bank. As an Israeli, for me, this is really a red line. If we start expelling the Palestinians from the West Bank, we shall have to take measures against the government unequaled in our history, unprecedented in our history. And until recently, I hadn't thought this possibility existed. And now things that are happening in our area and some expressions of some leaders in our community, including the retired chief of staff, which used racist portrayal of the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza, give rise to anxiety, sincere anxiety about the fate of these people as human beings and as a nation. And I think it is about time that all the denominations in the United States of America will get together and think what they can do about creating sympathetic public opinion to peace process rather than catastrophe in the Middle East.
Video 1 has been brought to you by the Presbyterian Church in the USA. If you would like to comment on the show, we invite your letters. Please address them to Communications Unit, Room 1935, 475 Riverside Drive, New York 10115.